So today we're reviewing the Canon 75-300 lens. The aperture starting point at this is 4 and that starts at the range of 70. So slowly throughout that it goes to 5.6. So basically when you're at 75 you've got a lower aperture, but when you're at 300 you've got a slightly higher aperture. I don't know exactly what point it changes. The middle of it apparently is 135, so I'm assuming it changes there because it says on the side. I don't know, take everything I say with a grain of salt. I use a 700D and a 75-300 lens, so I'm obviously not a professional, but I'm just here to give you my review. So this is my lens, so you can say I'm slightly biased, but that's kind of what reviews are. You can give your own thoughts and your experiences with it. So as I'm saying, the 75 is good for portraits, and especially at that aperture of f4. Everything is in focus, so you don't exactly get those beautiful like kind of bokeh effect in the background, but you do get some relatively sharp images, especially when the focus is done right. That leads us on to the transition of the focusing. So autofocusing isn't the best. You do get some really nice photos out of the autofocusing, don't get me wrong, but I often do find myself having to focus with the manual focus and then go to autofocus just to get that perfectly sharp as well, the most sharp I can do with this lens. So with it being a telephoto and its ranges from 75 to 300, the first thing that you go for with a telephoto is that it's for wildlife. So with that, with you having to manual focus and then autofocus, meaning that your wildlife has to wait, which it doesn't, so you do kind of have to have like a slow moving kind of whatever it is you're taking a photo of. Yesterday I was taking a photo of heron, and luckily herons are lazy, so it wasn't moving about all too much, so as soon as I was able to get that kind of range of focus, I could just snap as many photos as I want. But it is just that little bit of a more kind of inconvenience with you having to manual focus, get it right, and then press autofocus, and it kind of lens does the rest of the work for you, but you kind of have to do a little bit more work with the lens. So that is a little bit of an inconvenience, but you do get some decent photos out of doing that. So the build quality of the lens, since I picked it up for £75, I'm not expecting this to be made of gold or diamonds. It's made out of plastic, but to be fair, it's a decent plastic. You can kind of hear that, like it's not going to break on you anytime soon, but there is obviously better build quality that can be put into this lens, but because you buy it for such a cheap price, as I say, you're not going to expect anything great out of it. So I've already touched on build quality and I've already touched on focus. Now time to talk about the focus ring. Very, very smooth, but it's like when I'm zooming into something and I want to focus on it, I often find myself trying to manual focus and then it just skips that little bit. So I'll go like trying to focus onto it, and then just that little tad more is what I need to get it nice and sharp. But then when I try and move it that little tiny bit, it skips that and it goes kind of focuses a little bit further on, if that makes sense. So you're like under focused and you're over focused. So I try and leave the rest of that to the autofocus, and then that usually does fix it for me. But it is nice and smooth, and not really are there any other complaints than the one I just said. So now moving on to the other ring, it's relatively smooth. I mean, it feels kind of stiff at the start, and then as soon as you kind of get further on it, it feels a little bit more loose. So it's not too bad. Like, don't expect to do video with this, but if you're just zooming in and you're just taking your time with a photo, and there's not nothing holding you back to take your time and get a good photo, then this lens isn't not going to be terribly bad for you. But if you're in that situation where you need to take a quick photo and you need it really fast, and there's only that slight split of a second that you need to do it, then this lens isn't going to handle that. And then going back to the price, with a lens that cost me £75, I'm not going to expect the absolute world for it. So to be honest, it's done me quite well for everything that I wanted it to do. But if we're going to compare this to other lenses, since we're talking about price, the closest lens that Canon provides for this is the 55-250, and that has image stabilization. And then going back to video, like I just said, it's as I say, it's not got image stabilization, so when you're zoomed in, you're going to want a tripod, because you're not going to want those jittery movements, because you notice it a lot more when it's zoomed in. So just bring a tripod with you is what I'm going to say. So the cost goes up a little bit more because you have to invest in a tripod, but you should already have a tripod. So then talking about, we just on video, so then for photos, with the aperture, on its lowest aperture you get blurry corners, kind of to be expected from a lens that isn't exactly high end. So obviously when you go up the apertures, the corners get more and more sharp, and obviously the photos get more and more dark. That transitions onto our next thing. Don't expect this to be very, very good into going into like low light. It's just don't expect it to perform great in low light. Just have it in golden hour and you get the absolute most out of this lens. Any other time, just don't go with it. But I often just go out with golden hour anyway, so this is often in my bag when I take it out. With just specs on the sheet, it's obviously not the best lens in the world, but when you add the price into that bracket, it's decent. So just, obviously with a beginner photographer, you don't have the budget to go out and buy an L lens because you don't need one, and you just don't want to spend all your money on that. So, well, talking about personal experiences, as I've already touched on slightly, the focus is a little bit of inconvenience, and then the zoom ring, it isn't perfectly balanced at any point. It's really, really stiff to really, really loose. So yeah, that just all comes under the build quality. So the reason you're watching this video is to find out if it's worth it. No, I think with like a little bit more saving, you can go for the 55-250, and you're just as well going for that, just because you might not get as much zoom, but it comes with image stabilization. It probably comes with the same problems as this, but you do get those extra features that are worth that extra money. So this is very, very basic, very, very bare bones, just autofocus and zoom. That's what to be expected with like what I would describe as a kit lens, but it's a telephoto kit lens. So that's the review. Is it worth it? No. Is it any good? You can argue that it's any good, but it's just trial and error, honestly. Just, as I say, just don't go for this lens. Buy something else for a little bit more, and you'll be happy that you spent that little bit more. So that's the review. See you in another video. Goodbye.